Well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for taking some time. I'm so excited. This is the first unBurnt webinar, and I'm thrilled to be here with Kelly Hubbell. She is the founder and CEO of Sage Haus. She's building a company really focusing on what I believe is one of the biggest underlying challenges and problems that ultimately lead to burnout, the mental load, right? So as busy working professionals, working parents, there is just always so much on our plates. And I think that she's really created innovative solutions and lots of really interesting ways to think about it, to delegate, to put systems in place. So I won't spoil anything. She's got some things to take us through today. And then we're going to do some Q&A. So I have some questions to kind of dig in further, help illuminate some areas where we can all maybe take some things away today. And then we'll open it up at the end if there are questions from folks on the call. So I'm not going to, Kelly, I'll just turn it right over to you, and excited to see what you have for us today.
Awesome. Cool. Thanks for that intro. It's nice to see everybody, meet everybody here. I'm Kelly Hubbell. I am the founder of Sage Haus, and I'm going to share my screen so that I can have some visuals to help walk through as I introduce myself and like some of the concepts that we're going to discuss and go over today. But really, I founded Sage Haus a little over a year ago. I'm coming off of over a decade in software sales in a corporate role where I worked full time. And just a little bit more about me. My husband is an entrepreneur, owns a small technology investment bank. We live in Portland, Oregon. We have 3 kids, almost 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and my son turns 2 tomorrow. So we've got 3 little ones, and really, Sage Haus was born out of my experience as a mom, a full-time working, career-focused person. And so, yeah, I'm excited to chat a little bit more today, specifically about the mental load that we take on as parents, and really share essentially my solution and what I found to help alleviate and relieve the mental load, and really, offer up some actionable solutions for you all. And then happy to sort of like answer questions. Feel free to interrupt as we go, and we can make this interactive too if you want, but we'll also have time at the end for some questions. So let's get into it here. So really, my goal with Sage Haus in any of the ways that I work with clients, which I can kind of go over later, but when I do either one-on-one work with families where I help them find their support system in their village, or in my cohorts where I essentially teach my method for finding and hiring a village, really my goal is to help get families, and I was very much in this phase of where I felt like I was just surviving and not thriving. And so my goals are to help people get to a place where they're like really valuing their own time, and they're able to see how valuable and limited their time is as a resource. Help them get back to a place of partner collaboration. And the reason I use the terminology partner collaboration instead of division of labor is because I actually feel like division of labor, I know that's a term that we have, heard a lot about over the last decade or so, but to me, it can be really divisive because it feels like you're dividing things, and then like you're not necessarily collaborating and working together on things. And that's really what I'm trying to foster, is more of that that environment of collaboration between partners. And then just being more present in everything that you do. So whether that's spending more time with your kids or your family, or feeling more present in a meeting when you're at work, or out in nature, whatever that is. And then what I really focus on is helping people find and hire their village. Meaning what I specifically focus on and specialize in is helping families get more help through house managers, household managers, family assistants, and sometimes like a meal prep chef to sort of offload and outsource the mental load of eating healthfully. So I already introduced myself a little bit, but really, like, I started Sage House because I want to help other families relieve the mental load, stop this sort of like do it all culture, which by the way, I feel like we are right there. I think a lot of busy parents, moms and dads, are at the point where they don't want to be super mom anymore. They don't want to be super dad, and they are really leaning into this normalizing not doing it all, and instead like finding balance and taking care of themselves and taking care of their family. And so really that's what I'm really helping families do and get to through more actionable solutions. So, really like my story, I think I mentioned this, but basically, um, I felt like I was at the point of burnout, and I was at the point of just feeling like complete rock bottom, essentially, like physically and emotionally, after we had our second. So for me, I felt like, as a really type A person going into going into parenthood, I felt like I went into it with a lot of gusto, especially with my first, and I was able to sort of like sustain that and maintain that for quite a long period of time. But when our second came around, that's when it really felt like things were stacking up, like, physically, like the laundry was actually very much piled up, and I couldn't really, stay on top of like the groceries that we needed, the special orders we had, everyone's different schedules, making sure the dog was getting enough exercise. Like things just started to really fall apart and the wheels started coming off the bus. And so that's when I realized that I really, really needed help. And so, in sort of self-reflecting, I kind of went on my own journey to like, what are the solutions? Like, what is available to me? Because I can't be the only one feeling this overwhelmed. Like a lot of people have two kids. So like where am I kind of um going wrong, or what am I missing out on here? And so I really felt like what I was seeing in the commonalities among other busy parents, many times full-time working parents, or even like when partners are one person is full-time working and one person is, really in charge of like raising kids, they're still feeling like this immense amount of mental load and invisible labor, meaning like all of the things that are being done to make sure everyone is safe and healthy and thriving in your home. And so I just felt like, okay, I'm not alone. I learned the term mental load. I learned the term invisible labor. I felt like it was really hard. Another thing I was seeing, just a common theme was like for parents, it was really hard to figure out like, okay, we have such a finite period of time now in our day because of all of our new responsibilities. So like, how are we valuing our time? How are we able to prioritize things for ourselves, like exercise and like eating and, doing other things that are really important for us, like spending time with friends. And then I also felt like, okay, as I started to think more and more about like, well, why can't we just find more help and get more help? And of course, like, we could go on a whole rabbit hole about like government services and how, we could certainly use more support, from like a societal perspective. But I think, as I thought about barriers, which these may resonate with some of you, I think a lot of them come by way of like financial, like, oh yeah, a nanny sounds great, but like I can't necessarily afford that. Or stigma. We're kind of like afraid of what other people would think about us if we had more support, or we, had more help in our home that maybe wasn't a family member. And then I also felt like for me personally, I was like, okay, I need more help in my home, but like for me, it's not a nanny that I need. It's not childcare I need. Actually, my kids are in childcare. My kids are in preschool. My oldest is now in kindergarten. So like we have school figured out for the majority of the day. But you know, why am I still feeling so overwhelmed? And like, how would I find someone to help me with all of these other things that I am spending time on managing my household? And really like what it comes down to is this common need for support systems. What's interesting is that the reason, one of the like core reasons that I feel like we're sort of in this dilemma that we are in today, where parents are feeling overwhelmed. I mean, the Surgeon General, as many of you know, just came out and said like parents are stressed, parents are overwhelmed, and one of the like main reasons is because 70%, the majority of young families, are living an hour or more away from their family. And in the past, like I felt like there was a lean on, family, like parents, siblings, cousins to help us when we were sort of in these intense seasons of life. But today that's just not the case. Like because of opportunities and culture, like we move, we're closer to jobs, we're closer to like places that we want to live in. And so I really feel like the need for support is certainly out of this kind of cultural movement away from our immediate family. And I think it's important to note that um, even for many clients, like families that I work with at Sage House, many of them live close to family members or parents, but we are very much in this sandwich generation where like our parents had us when they were older, and we now have kids, but like our parents maybe aren't as physically able to help as even they want to. And so really like we need more help, but we can't completely rely on family even if they're close by. And so, as you know, I mean, like this is what really like fully ties in with what Allison is doing, and this movement around burnout is like, for me, this resulted in this overwhelm, burnout, resentment, anxiety, depression, stress, and overwhelm. And so basically, like as I was sort of on this journey to find a solution, I kind of like went up down a rabbit hole of research. So I was like, okay, I read the book, Drop the Ball. And for me, like in concept, this sounded really great to just stop checking your mail, let the laundry pile up. Someone else will figure it out. Like for me, that just didn't really work. And you know what, like for people that did work for, I was like, great, I'm so happy that solution is available to them. But like for me, that's not gonna work. Fair Play. I also, of course, read Fair Play in 2019. I thought, conceptually it's really great. And there are a lot of elements of the Fair Play method in terms of dividing labor and tasks in your home that I think are really, really helpful for me. Even when we like did a deep dive on that method, it still like it still didn't work for me and my spouse. And I think part of the reason is just because like, again, our time is so limited, and really it sort of emphasizes my sort of hypothesis that even if there are two highly functioning, highly educated, like executive functioning partners in a relationship, there still just are not enough hours in the day to get everything done that needs to get done to run and manage a household. And so that's sort of that's my commentary there. And then solution 3, of course, like medication and meditation. Like you go to your doctor, you're like, I'm really overwhelmed, I'm not sure really what to do. And they're like, oh, have you tried Zoloft? Or like, oh, have you been meditating? And of course, like I'm trying these things and I'm thinking, okay, this still isn't really working for me. I'm still feeling overwhelmed and anxious and all these things. So to me, what the solution that I found and what's worked for my family was to find and hire a house manager who helps our family basically as a second pair of hands to do so much and take a lot of the mental load and physical load and help us in our home. And so that is sort of like what I do now is I help families kind of get to this same point and like fast forward through all of the hard stuff that I went through and get to a solution. So really like the core principles of Sage House are, reclaiming your time. I think it's important to note like reclaiming your time is sort of the goal. But I also feel like it's not just the time, it's not just the hour that you save from a grocery store trip and unloading groceries and all that. It's the mental load that that you're finding relief from. And now you are getting back that sort of like mental capacity and mental space to go and spend it on in other ways or ways that feel, valuable to you. And so really creating better systems, and I'll define that here in just a second, but like the way I see it, in fact, I think in reflection, when I started Sage House, I really was like, okay, I found a household manager. Every mom needs this. How do I help everybody find one? But what I realized in the feedback that I was getting from clients is, yes, I do need that. But first, before I even get to that point, I need to figure out like what I need help with, what is working in my home right now, what's not working in my home, and how can I streamline sort of the operations and the systems in my home so that I can better delegate it to someone to help me. And so that's kind of one thing I focus on, is helping families sort of go to step 0, which is figuring out what they need help with, prioritizing it, and then outsourcing and finding their village. And then eventually, like, that reduces the mental load, and that's sort of like the cycle. So let me define home systems for those of you who are like, what is she talking about? I think high level, you can kind of think about like home systems very similar to like the systems and the operations at a business. So when you're scaling a company and you're scaling a business, and I certainly know I have a lot of experience working in startups and in the tech space. And when you're doing that and scaling a business, you use principles for like, how do we streamline operations? How do we figure out like how to onboard people? How do we like make things work at scale? And that's like exactly what I feel really strongly about, helping families kind of bring those same principles into their home. And so systems in a home are routines, processes, and tools that are tailored to a family's needs, so like very custom to a family, to help them manage household tasks. So some examples of this are like weekly meal planning, having standing lists for like pantry, grocery, having a schedule for laundry every week, having a schedule for like cleaning, and then having sort of routines and plans on like a daily, weekly, monthly basis, having like a seasonal by month sort of list of like chores and house maintenance and things like that. And just like really trying to streamline all these things happening in our home so that we can see it all and make everything that has for a long time been invisible very visible, so that you can start to then take things off of your plate and offload them and delegate to other people. So that's what I do, is I help families do that. Make the invisible visible, operationalize and create home systems, and then recruit and hire their village. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I'm looking at, I talked about outsourcing, I talked about home systems. Yeah, so I think like, in conclusion, kind of starting where like ending where we started, which is basically like, if any of this is interesting to you, please let me know. I'd love to work with you. I am just super passionate about helping people value their time, figure out better partner collaboration, be more present in everything that they're doing, and finding and hiring their village. I think maybe one thing that I'll note is part of my methodology is that I teach in my cohorts, and that I do personally when I'm helping someone hire a house manager or family assistant, is I have like a very set playbook for like a hiring method, all the way from here's how you figure out all the things you need help with and make the invisible visible. Here's how you create a job description that encompasses the roles and responsibilities, that things that you need help with. Here are some, here's where you would post a job. Here are the interview questions you ask. Here's the process for contacting references and then offering a job and then successfully onboarding someone into your home to make sure that they're going to be successful, you're going to be successful. And so that's sort of like that hiring methodology piece that I teach and that I use myself when I find house managers for families. Let's see, these are some of my offerings, but I think more importantly, if you want to find me, you can follow me on social. You can sign up for my newsletter. And then I've got a lot of free resources on my website, on my Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn too, which is how Allison and I found each other and connected. So I will pause, and then we can kind of move over to the fireside chat questions or Q&A.
Thank you so much, Kelly. And yeah, we've known each other, I've been following each other, and I still took away a number of new nuggets. So thank you. That was awesome. I have some questions, but before I dive in, is so in alignment with everything that, you know, I believe in and why I'm building unBurnt. One of the core tenets, we just cannot be on all the time without rest, without help. Like, we can, quote unquote, do it all. We just can't do it all the time without being able to delegate and have help. And so I absolutely love what you're building. And I think from a burnout perspective, making things more visible and, you know, approaching what needs to happen in the home in a similar way that we approach business with such gusto. You know, I think we all start off as ambitious, you know, 20 somethings wanting to really get after it and show up in the workplace in a way that we're achieving milestones, we're getting those promotions, and then we have kids, and it feels like all of a sudden there's just way too much more on the plate than is actually feasible for one human being. So I love what you're building and kind of taking this premise of building systems, having the ability to have the checklist, making it visible. It's all, you know, definitely, I think, really helping families that you're working with start to prevent some burnout. So that's awesome. So before I dive into some of the questions I have, does anyone on the call have any questions for Kelly?
Start off. Hey, Kelly, it's Pete. I'm just curious, you know, I imagine this is much like finding the right child care, finding someone who's going to help care for things around the house. Like, how many household managers or helpers did you go through before you found the right one? And is it one person who helps out, or did you find yourself looking for, you know, a number of people who each specialize in their own different task types, if you will?
Yeah, good question. Good two questions, so I'll answer both. One is, we found a house manager about 3 years ago who's been with our family for 3 years. I it took me months to find her. It took me like going through a lot of interviews, a lot of meeting candidates to find her. And so, but I feel like, you know, we absolutely found the right person, and that's why, like, she's been with us for such a long time. She's so amazing. And then, so actually, to answer your question, like, I originally sort of set out to hire someone who could help me do household management in addition to meal prep, because meal prep is such a big part of that mental load that we take on. And in doing so, like, what I ended up, long story, like, I kind of ended up structuring her differently. What I ended up doing was, like, she was so good with our kids, and we needed help with like babysitting for date nights. One thing our house manager does is she watches our kids every Friday night so that we can have a standing date night. And that part was really important to me. So in order to, as to not overload her and her hours helping out with our family and like occasional childcare, I ended up hiring a separate person who does the meal prep for our family and drops food off for us on Monday afternoon. So what I did was I kind of like created two different roles, which has worked really well for our family. However, I will say that a lot of the families that I work with, I help them find someone who does both of those things. So I would say like 80% of the house managers slash meal prep, like, I help them find one person who does all of the above. But I will say, like, a common theme in the clients that I work with, the families I work with, and my own family is we still have, you know, the last sort of like wheel of our village is we have cleaners who come every 2 weeks to like deep clean our house. And then our house manager sort of helps keep things like up and clean and tidy in between the cleaners. So it's sort of that like trifecta of basically my house manager, our meal prep chef, and our cleaners who like help me run my household.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think you're on mute, Gina.
Now I'm not. So nice to meet you. I love your story and your business. I think it's super helpful and much needed. I was wondering, when you were looking yourself and when you help other families, how does Sage House have a hand in vetting the people who you're considering for the family? Or in your case, when you were doing the interviews, how do you, are you doing background checks? Are you, how does that all work? Because unfortunately, that's the way the world is. You
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
check
yeah.
everyone
No,
out.
Yeah.
That's a great question. Yeah. So I work one-on-one with families. I take on somewhere between like 3 and 5 families a month that I do one-on-one, what I call recruiting and placement for. And it starts with, I do a long kickoff call with them to try to figure out like, who is their ideal candidate? What are some of the characteristics that they're looking for in someone, along with helping them define the roles and responsibilities for the job. And then like essentially the outcome from that initial meeting is, here's the job description that I'm going to go and post. And then I research in their area, like in their geographic location, all of the different places that I would start looking for someone and like post a role. That's like Craigslist, care.com, but then there are also a lot of like hyper local resources like colleges, universities, Facebook groups, things like that, where, we find a lot of success in finding the right person. And then you're absolutely right. So I do the vetting. So I talk to the candidates, I run interviews, I do like research on some have already been background checked. I've partnered with a company who does background checks. So if the family decides to go forward with like a background check, there's a lot of different kinds. There's like driver check, there's a criminal check. They're all sort of different, but I do partner with a company that handles background checks. If family wants to do that, which I typically encourage. But I do like set up, once I get to 2 candidates that I really like for a family, I basically set up interviews with the family, and then I help them throughout the rest of the process. So help them figure out like how to offer the job, how to onboard somebody. I have a employee employment agreement that they can use that has, that was attorney drafted. And then I basically like walk them through the whole rest of the process, and then we're not done until they're like, they've hired somebody and they feel like really good about onboarding them. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, that's totally awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to jump in with a few questions, and then if folks want to come back in, either use the chat or come off mute. So I think one of the biggest things that I thought about when I met you and I learned more about Sage House was how personally, so I'll speak from my own personal experience, it can be really hard to ask for help. And taking that one step further, I feel like with your partner, you're also, at times it can feel like you are truly dividing and conquering just to get through the day, the week, the month. And even with best intentions of wanting to sit down and kind of like map it all out, it just feels like that's the thing that actually falls off the list, because again, you're just in survival mode. So to be able to prioritize even that first starting point of, what do I need? Like, where do I even begin? And before I go off and work with Sage House or potentially try to build this on my own, like, how do I even ask for help and make the space and the time, whether it's individually, with a partner, with a family, to sit down and start.
Yeah. So a couple things. One is, it's absolutely really hard to get started. I think that's like, one of the things I mentioned is like, I think one of the biggest barriers is people sort of get paralyzed by, oh no, I need help, but like, I don't even know really where to begin. And so that is like the first step that we take in my 6-week cohort, is making the invisible visible. So it really starts with the individual of like, okay, let's get a really solid sort of foundational idea of all of the things that I am doing and are on my plate, and try to figure out like, what kind of time and energy is that like, using of my capacity. And I think it starts with that person. And then I really think like the second step, and we just did this in week 2 of my cohort last week, is collaborating with your partner to open their eyes to all of that invisible labor that you're doing, and also asking them like, what are the invisible things that you're doing that you would like to add to this list of the things, so that we can get a really comprehensive view in our family and in our household of all the things that we are both doing to manage it. And then from there, like, one of the things I I really encourage of, my cohort students is setting up 1 hour a week with an agenda, with like a very focused agenda for partner collaboration. So it's like every week at, for us at 7:30 p.m. on Sundays, we get the kids to bed and we meet about the week and we go over like, here's what's going on this week. Let's go over the calendar. Let's go over urgent events. Let's look out 60 days. Let's figure out what we're doing next weekend. Like, this is the agenda I kind of, I expect to walk through. And I really think that those are the foundations of like finding and asking for help. Like, you've got to figure out, like, you've got to come to terms with your time is really valuable and you're doing too much. And then getting your partner on board. And then I think from there, like, I actually just, I just dropped a, partner collaboration guide on Monday. It's free and it's on, my Stan store through my Instagram. And that kind of walks you through the next steps after that. So it's like, figure out what you're doing, get your partner on board, and then like go and find the help that you need. And I think it's like, anyway, from there, like, I have a lot of actionable things that like I could help you with at Sage Haus, but yeah, I think the first step is just like one thing at a time. Yeah.
Helps to kind of break down the getting started barrier, because that can be sometimes the biggest thing where you're like, actually, we'll just keep white knuckling and not really sitting down to create the change that you need, because it does feel overwhelming to start. So I love that. How would you recommend folks start small if they feel like, from a budget perspective, perhaps getting someone part-time or full-time to come in, might not work for their family, but they still want to be able to have some of the actionable ways that you teach folks to set up systems and be able to get help, even if that doesn't look like a full-time house manager?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the biggest questions I get from families is like, hey, I think I need this. This sounds lovely, but I only have X budget, or I can only, I only really need help like 10 to 15 hours a week or whatever. And I always tell people the same thing, which is like, there's a person out there who wants to work with your family for 10 to 15 hours a week. There are people who like want part-time jobs. They're entrepreneurs themselves. They're freelancers. They're students. Like, there are people out there who like need and want part-time jobs like this, that are great jobs. And so, I would say like, don't rule it out, and then, find ways to get really creative about your budget. When I have people in my cohorts have those conversations with their partner about like, here's some of the things that we're already doing to outsource. Like, we spend this much money on Instacart. We spend this much money eating out every week. We're spending money on like delivery services and dog walking. And like, once they start to almost like piece together all the things they're kind of doing, they tend to find budget and realize like, okay, instead of putting the laundry on my porch, maybe if I paid an extra 15 to 20, $20, like all of my laundry could be folded and put away. Like, that maybe is worth it to me. So, I think there are a lot of ways to just like, I think budgets are obviously like a, very personal sort of decisions, but, we have one of the things we walk through in week 3 of my cohort, which is today, is talking through like your budget with your partner and figuring out like how to kind of fit it in to your life. And then I think there's also a lot of other creative ways too to stretch your budget. Like, there are high school kids, teenage kids in the neighborhood who like want to walk a dog after school for an hour. And like, that's great for you. Like, if your dog needs an extra hour of walking, like that's really affordable for you. Or there are mother's helpers who like, can come and help you with a home project on a weekend or task, or watch your kids for a couple hours so you can finally tackle some, big like closet reorganization project or something like that. So I think like really getting creative, like using your resources.
Great. You shared a story recently, and I'm just curious if you have another one that you can share with the group of a success story. So something that really energized you from either a client or, someone participating in one of the cohorts, where you got the feedback that setting things up for success, putting systems in place, has really benefited their family. And if you can just share what that looked like.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's hard to pick a single one. I actually, I'll share one. I had a woman who joined my cohort over the summer that I just did a brief check-in call with. And she was in like a unique situation where first of all, her biggest barrier was like she sort of grew up in a family where it was the kind of no days off. Like she saw her mom like working really hard, like basically 24 hours a day. Like there was always something to be done and never really sat down, never really rested. And she had they had one kid and she was like, I don't really want that. Like I want to be spending time with my daughter on the weekends, and that's what's important to me. And like I haven't deep cleaned my fridge in 6 months, but like like I could use a lot of help. And so she also didn't have a ton of budget. So she wanted someone who could just come on like Sundays and work for their family like 6 hours on a Sunday and help them just sort of get through a bunch of stuff like deep cleaning projects, going through their mail, sorting through mail, running some errands for them. And she ended up finding a student who like wanted that job, who was bright and ambitious and lived close by. And anyway, she was literally like, I feel like she was a whole new person when I called her, because I had this call with her. She was like, it's so amazing. Like she also said like, my husband was a little incredulous. Like he was a little bit nervous about having someone in our house, but she's like, but now that he's not going through the mail every day, and like, we're feeling more organized. We're feeling like our house is just like more peaceful and zen. She was like, it's been life-changing for us and really affordable for them. So I love that. I was like so happy to hear that. But then, there are other families I feel like I've sort of helped to just think outside of the box. I think a lot of families really get wrapped around the axle when it comes to when they think about like, oh, I need more help, they immediately think, oh, I need childcare. And I think our culture for a long time has said like, oh, you need help, you need childcare. And like, sure, yes, childcare is super important, especially for working parents. But um, I think, for me, a lot of the families I've talked to, like I've talked to stay-at-home moms recently who are like, I want to hang out with my kids during the day. I want to be present for my kids. I signed up for raising my children. I didn't sign up to also cook a home cooked meal, do all the laundry, run errands. Like I didn't sign up for that. And so it's like something has to give. So I think what I love is like helping people think outside the box of like, it's not just, it's not the childcare. It's like, what are the other things that you could take off your plate so that you can feel more present when you're with your kids? I had a family who had like really early mornings because one of them had a client in Israel. And the only way that she could take on that client was if she had more help in the morning. And so we basically found her like a house manager who came over at 5:30 in the morning and like got their kids dressed and had breakfast and took them to school so that she could take on this new client. And otherwise, like she wouldn't have been able to. So, I think it's just like figuring out what works for your family and realizing like there are solutions. Like this is not just sort of a cut and dry box. Like let's figure out what kind of support your family needs.
And I think the ability to just kind of break through the paradigm of I'm going to be exhausted for the next 20 years and it's hard. And, there's really nothing I can do to help myself is, I think, an important recognition point as well, because there are ways that you can be creative and think about, setting your family and your home up for success. So I love that. I have one more question, but I'm going to pause and see if there's any other questions from the group. And yes, Dana, they do. They all pile up. Pete, I think you came off mute. Did you have a question or?
Yeah, I was kind of curious, like what, from an entry standpoint, what would be a minimum amount you would expect? I have no idea. I know what babysitting costs, but I have no idea what house management would cost.
Yeah. And Pete, it just depends on where you live. That's kind of one of the things I help families zero in on is like what kind of expected like compensation rates there would be in a specific geographic location. Like for me in Portland, Oregon, I would say a house manager is somewhere between like $30 and $35 an hour. I'm placing a candidate right now in New Jersey, so probably 30 minutes outside of New York City. And I think the range there is more like 35 to 45.
Oh, that's
I'm
right where I
placing
am.
a candidate.
Perfect.
What's that?
That's right where I am.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah. And then I'm placing a candidate right now in South Bend, Indiana. And like there, the rates there are more like $25 to $30 an hour. So it just depends on like, like everything, cost of living, where do you live?
And are these typically part-time position? Is this someone that's like, what's the minimum number of hours you see as helpful? Because obviously if it's just an hour a week, maybe not as impactful.
Yeah. I would say like as a minimum, like I would say 8 to 10 hours a week, I think is probably like, good for somebody. But then again, like, I'm sure you could find a student, like I mentioned, like the New York mom who found a student to come over for like 6 hours on a Sunday every week and like hers is 6 hours a week, and that works for both of them. So I think it just really depends. Like on what you need. There are some people who have full-time house managers or 30 hours a week, and those incorporate things like meal prep and grocery shopping and more sort of childcare elements. Like, I've helped a client kind of have a house manager slash afternoon nanny where like she comes every day from 1 to 5 p.m. and she does 1 to 3 p.m. She does house management. And then from 3 to 5, she hangs out with the kids after school. And that's sort of like a hybrid role. So
Awesome. Thanks for the answer.
yeah.
And it is really, I'm just even myself processing, like there's so many colleges around where I live, students, that's a great talent pool because it works, it's part-time, they're potentially close, they're ambitious, but they're not in the full-time job force yet. So it's an interesting angle to kind of think about recruiting folks from schools.
Yeah. I've always said to people, like, I wish that I had a role like this in college because I feel like I'd be so good at it. But instead I was like bartending and serving to get my, work my way through college. But yeah,
Same here.
yeah, I think this is a like wonderful way to employ like part-time students.
Yeah. And kids
Yeah,
like
It teaches
kids.
them skills too. Like I think it's good to, it helps them understand like, whoa, this is all of the things that, are encompassing when you like become a parent, when you're working full time. Like I think it's interesting for them.
Yeah. Plus, I think that kids not that they're kids, but some kids in college, to me anyway, look like they're teenagers. So, your kids might be more happy with someone who's closer to their age, also who's either hanging out with them or taking them places or whatnot. It's like a win-win there
Yeah.
also. An easier
Love that.
adjustment period, as if, maybe if you took someone else from an agency or, an older person. Nothing
Yeah.
against older people. I'm one of them, but I'm
We
just
could be
saying.
cool too. We can be cool.
Yes.
Well, it's funny you say that. I feel like some families, tell me like for real, like when I get on calls, they're like, we kind of like, we would kind of dig like an, older grandma vibe for our house manager
Right.
or grandpa
So,
vibe. And I'm like, cool, like, awesome. Thanks for telling me that because, there are certainly different characteristics or like someone with a little bit more life experience, if that's someone
right.
somebody wants versus like somebody who's really young and sort of like ambitious and like they might need a little bit more direction at first, but if some people are like really okay with that. So I think it
Yeah.
just sort of
Yeah.
depends.
Right. And also probably when you brought up how some folks are an hour or like, states away from their immediate family or their in-laws, it might be nice to have like the surrogate grandpa hanging around you know what I mean? So
Totally.
yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad there's no ageism at Sage House because there is everywhere else.
No, not at all.
Good
No.
to know.
So last question from my end, Kelly, as a founder, as a busy working mom, even with all of these systems in place, even with, the ability to have things run a little bit more smoothly during the week, inevitably, I'm sure there are weeks where it still feels chaotic and things can still be super busy. So with that said, what do you do to rest? Like what's your go-to for yourself to take time and make sure that you're resetting so that you can focus and prioritize everything else you have on your plate?
Yeah, for sure. I'm laughing because this is one of those weeks that you just described because my husband is traveling for work and it's been chaotic, but thankfully my house manager has been like here to help me, an extra pair of hands, and I'm so grateful. But yeah, all that being said, one thing that we've also done and sort of implemented is taking nights off individually each week. So my husband is, swam in college and it's still really important to him to, like maintain his sort of like swimming, and he really enjoys the community and sort of social aspect of doing that. So he does like one night a week, he'll go swim. And then one night a week I take to either like go to a yoga class or meet up with a girlfriend for dinner or just go get some, work on my laptop at a coffee shop. So, I feel like I just take time for myself, at least once a week. And then we also sort of get a break as a couple, like I mentioned, on like date nights on Fridays. But, yeah, for me, like, I think rest, I have been very rigid about my rest. I feel like I really, really try to get my 8 hours of sleep every night. We have our TV automatically turn off at 8:30 p.m. so that we can't keep it on. We have to go to bed. That's like a trick of the trade for us. But yeah, I think for me, like, yoga, spending time with my friends is kind of how I like rest and sort of like re-energize.
That it's baked into the schedule, because I think even with the best intentions, sometimes if you really should get back to yoga, if you don't have that standing night or the hour that is carved out, it of course falls by the wayside. So I love that. Thank you so much. This has been really insightful, so helpful. Any other questions from the group before we say goodbye?
No, thank you so much. And I'll be sure to pass this on. And thank you, Allison, for hosting Kelly.
Yes.
Thank you both.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. Thanks for all the great questions and participation. And Allison, this is great. I'm excited to keep coming to the next one.
Yes, absolutely. And I was going to say, before we all depart, every month I'm going to be putting together something like this, really trying to make sure we're representing the various domains across wellness, because that in and of itself can feel really overwhelming when you want to put, whether it be systems in place or learn more about nutrition or incorporate fitness and movement into your routines, but it feels like another thing to put on your list. So my goal with this series is to introduce new experts every month, have that live for on-demand access. So if you can't make it the day of a webinar, please continue to check out unBurnt, and really just continue the conversation where we're normalizing and destigmatizing burnout in our society, and letting go of this notion that we have to be exhausted all the time, and instead making space for holistic wellness, rest, connection, community. And so that's really the goal. So hopefully there'll be future topics that speak to you all. But in the meantime, thank you so much for joining.